Forum, and thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are going to open with Margot Dode, who is going to play and sing for us. I'm going to kindly request that people take their seats and enjoy the music, and please refrain from talking as much as possible while Margot is singing and playing so we can all hear her. Thank you.
Thank you. Lorraine, thank you. I had my long song ready for tonight, but I'm told it's better to do it tomorrow morning when some of the speakers are here that talk about specific topics that I mentioned in the long song. So what we'll do tonight is something that I've written recently. One of my pet bugaboos, slamming the corporation Monsanto. This one I sung at the Against Monsanto rally in May. And because I made this poster earlier last year, and I kept looking at it thinking, well, okay. So this song is called Bite Me, Monsanto. And you can sing along because the chorus is easy. I need a drink of water first, thanks. Some non-GMO water. Not in a plastic container. Okay. Bite me, Monsanto. Well, I was born to raise a fuss. Bite me, Monsanto. You ain't hurt the last of us. You're probably wishing we would go away, but today is such a very nice day, and we're just here to say we're not afraid of you. No, we're not afraid of you. No, we're not afraid of you when we sing Bite Me, Monsanto. Well, I was born to raise a fuss. Bite me, Monsanto. You ain't heard the last of us. I think your products, they really blow, and I think it's time for you to go, 'cause you're still pushing those GMOs. We're so ashamed of you. Oh, we're so ashamed of you, you bad boys. We're so ashamed of you, so we sing Bite Me, Monsanto. But I was born to raise a fuss. Bite me, Monsanto. You ain't heard the last of us. Full tilt, we're going all out, 'cause you can't bully us about. And we got your number, there's no doubt. We're gonna get you out. Yes, we will get you out like they do in a few places already. When we will sing, come, bite me, Monsanto. Well, I was born to raise a fuss. Bite me, Monsanto. You ain't heard the last of us. I wonder how you sleep at night. Roundup kills my appetite. Creating jobs won't make it right, not ever. Well, I was reading something on a blog about three-eyed cats and human frogs and hairless sheep and flying dogs. Well, aren't you clever? Bite me, Monsanto. Well, I was born to raise a fuss. Bite me, Monsanto. You ain't heard the last of us. Can't you see the consequence? Killing pollinators makes no sense. And if getting rich is your defense, well, we'll keep the pressure up. Well, we'll keep the pressure up, you bad boys. We'll keep the pressure up when we sing Bite me, Monsanto. Well, I was born to raise a fuss by 3 Monsanto. You ain't heard the last of us. No, you ain't heard the last of us. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Margot. And we're all looking forward to hearing you again over the weekend.
Yeah.
We recognize that the events that are taking place this weekend are taking place on traditional lands. They're the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Huron-Wendat, and the Attawandaron peoples. And in that spirit, I would like to now invite Gary Dickey to open with a prayer. Thank you, Gary. Tina, are you?
Greetings, everyone, and welcome. We do have Gary Dickey, and he is here to be able to give the opening prayer. He has a lot of different experiences within the community as both a probation officer and as well as now a part-time teacher after going back to school. And he's become very much a grassroots movement activist in his retirement kind of years. And so welcome, and thanks very much for providing us with the opening prayer.
We're gathered here tonight and this weekend to do a lot of things. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different things. And it's the Aboriginal Anishinaabe tradition, I'm Anishinaabe, to do things in a certain way. And one of these things is that I'm supposed to introduce myself to you. So I'll do that first. Bujo. And this is Minojibe no. What I've just said is that I said hello, that's Bujo. I am called, or I call myself, and then I gave you my Indian name. What it translates out to mean is good spirit one. And so it's up to me to try to figure out what that means for me and to live my life that way. That's the way the spirit world knows me, is through my Indian name. What I'm doing now is I'm soon going to be giving the opening prayer or benediction or whatever you want to call it. But we're here we're going to be looking at over the weekend inequities, if you will, or ills of the world, however you want to call it. But in the Anishinaabe territory, in the Anishinaabe tradition, you can't look at what's wrong outside until you've looked inside yourself first. You have to know yourself before you can take and tell somebody else what's wrong with the world out there. So I'm going to take a Haudenosaunee ceremony, and I'm going to kind of put it into words. Creator, grant us the ability to see our own shortcomings and the ability to overcome them. Let our ears be opened so we might hear the truth. Let our eyes be clear so we may see the truth. Let our tongues be straight so we may speak the truth. Let our hearts be strong so we might do that which is right, so that we may walk in beauty and harmony, coming to you, O Creator, unashamed and in harmony with Mother Earth and your wishes. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Gary. Hello, everyone, again. My name is Lorraine McNeil, and I'm one of the members of the organizing team for the London Regional Social Forum. And again, I want to welcome you and say how delighted we all are to see you here tonight, and hope that many of you will be able to stay with us for much of the weekend. Before we go any further, I would like to read our safe space statement that many of you will have seen on the first page of your program. As activists, we work to create spaces that are free from as many barriers as possible. We are all responsible for creating the spaces we desire by educating ourselves, each other, and ensuring that we are in dialogue. We recognize that the dynamics of hierarchy, power, and privilege that exist within society are also found within our movement. We believe that failing to address these dynamics alienates and further victimizes our friends and allies, and stops us from creating the equitable world we want. Individuals participating are asked to be aware of their language and behavior, and to think about whether it might be oppressive to others. We define oppressive behavior as any conduct that demeans, marginalizes, rejects, threatens, or harms anyone on the basis of ability, activist experience, age, criminal record, cultural background, education, ethnicity, gender, immigration status, language, nationality, physical appearance, race, religion, self-expression, sexual orientation, or any other such factors. Everyone has a right to feel safe and valuable. Safe space is a communal responsibility. We encourage the group as a whole to develop their own sense of what a safe space society would look and feel like. We encourage everyone to be conscious and respectful of the safety of others. Thank you. You may hear those words several times over the course of the weekend. That's because we want to do our utmost to ensure that we do, in fact, create a safe space for everyone, for all of our presenters and participants over the course of the weekend. And we also want to encourage you at any time, perhaps during a workshop or a presentation, if you feel at all unsafe, please, we encourage you to raise your hand and to let people know that you're feeling unsafe, so that the issue can be addressed, and we can continue to work to make sure that we create a safe space for every one of us here, and I thank you for that. I just want to say a couple of words about the Social Forum. How many of you are here for your very first Social Forum experience? Wow, that's most of you. This is not London's first social forum. London is not unique in the social forum movement. That dates back to Brazil in 2001, but I think some of our speakers are going to tell you more about that. London has had 3 previous social forums in 2005, 2006, and 2007. We actually were the only regional social forum to be able to have 2 in a row, and then we decided to top that by having 3 in a row. Thank you. That led to a 7-year hiatus before we were empowered and able to organize another social forum. But we hope that we've been able to incorporate some of the wisdom and some of the amazing experiences of the past. And we're so excited about the program that we have lined up for this weekend, and so excited to see you all here. And we really hope that this is a very meaningful, enjoyable, and stimulating weekend. And thank you again. And thank you. I now want to call on one of the other members of the organizing team, Wendy Goldsmith, to say a few words. Thank you, Wendy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Gary, for your opening prayer and remarks. Very much appreciated. I wrote what I was going to say about 5 times, and each time I thought was quite brilliant, and then I rewrote it. But then other things happened. I was going to talk about all the celebrations that we've had in our community, and there are many. We've had an incredible 5, 10, 15 years of community building and organizing in this community, of which we should all be proud. Some of us are new to these initiatives. Some of us have been around for a long time. Some of our groups are just joining. Some have been friends for a very long time. And I think that's one thing that we should really celebrate this weekend and build upon. There have also been many losses. I myself lost my own mother not very long ago. My partner Dave just lost his uncle. And one of our dear friends, Janny Bearden, died today. I first met Janny when I was a volunteer at my sister's place. And we hit it off right off the bat. She was fun and witty and generous and kind and giving, and her spirit was incredible. And I saw it the moment that I met her. And we did incredible things together. That we were in a group called Expressions, and you can only imagine what a group of women called Expressions could do. So we did whatever we could do together, and we did a lot of fun things. And Janny was a lover of community, and she was a lover of giving. She gave everything from her heart. She lived some of the most significant trauma that I can imagine. And I know that many of you here and many of you that you know have and will, and know others who have experienced the same kind of trauma. And my hope for us, in honor of Janny's spirit this weekend, is that we can learn how to heal together, that we can learn how to heal as a community, that we can learn how to build on the pain that has been exposed to this earth. Those of you who know me know that I will use any excuse to go barefoot, but today there's a purpose. And that purpose is to connect to the earth, to get as close to the mother as I can, so that I can channel all of that beautiful energy, all of the energy that the earth is sending to us, that the mother is sending to us, saying that this is not right. What we are doing now is not right and must change. That we can channel that together, that we can bring this forward in a way that we can take this to the national social forum, to international social forums, to our neighbors, to our friends, to anybody who cares to listen to us, from our hearts and from our souls and from the depths of the truth of which we speak. And I do that in honor of Janny, who, if she could have been here, she would have been. The last memory I have of Janny is at Sunfest. And again, if any of you know me, I'm not a religious person, but Sunfest is my religion. And I'm there for 4 days and 4 nights straight. And Janny always finds me. And this time, we always dance at the front of the stage. And this time, she wanted to be up with the rest of us. She wanted to be at the table, seated with the rest of us. But her wheelchair was so heavy, and she was so heavy, and she just couldn't do it on her own. And suddenly people, some of my friends, but some people who didn't even know her, were helping her to raise her up, to lift her chair up, to bring her to the table, to sit with us, to join in our community, to be one of us, to be one with us, to dance with us, to sing and laugh with us. That's my very last memory of her. And I want us to take that forward because I think it's really important. And I think she would have wanted that. She would have wanted that for all of us. Because that's what's going to make this forum amazing. That's what's going to make our community amazing. It's a hard one. It's a big loss. And I read a lot of poetry, but tonight I'm not going to read one of mine. I'm going to read someone else's. This is a poem written by a dear friend of mine, and her name is Joanna Crowell, and she is the beautiful daughter of George Crowell, who happens to be here in the audience, who is giving a workshop on Saturday, I think? Sunday on monetary reform, and you should go to it if you are able, because I'll be there. She's a beautiful goddess, and she writes amazing poetry, and this one just spoke to me, and it's also the title of her book. It's called I Ate a Rainbow, and so I dedicate this to Janny. I ate a rainbow for breakfast, swallowed the moon whole for dinner, skipped lunch to occupy your heart, dreamt a new world till the sun rose from inside me. And that was Janny. That is Janny. So I ask as we move forward, to take all of the good that we have created as a community, and there's so much, amidst all the frustrations and the difficulties and the challenges and the emails and who's doing what and who's got this and all of the crap that comes with it, just remember what's really important in our hearts and bring that forward into every workshop, into every interaction you have this weekend, into every encounter that you have. And let's just have like the best social forum ever. Can we do that?
Thank you so much, Wendy. I think it was really important to recognize and honor Janny, and I'm quite sure that Janny is here in spirit with us this evening. My name is Patty Dalton, if you don't know who I am, and I bring greetings from you on behalf of the London District Labour Council. I also wanted to acknowledge some guests here today. Earlier today, I was in Windsor at another event that had many activists there, and so I just wanted to recognize Ken Lewenza Jr. Yes, stand up, Ken. Ken Lewenza has been developing a community coalition in Windsor, and we have been working both locally and regionally to build activist capacity. There's a lot of exciting things going on in Windsor. We're very pleased to have him here. We also have Carol Baker. Stand up, sister. She's been with the OFL and is a Common Front organizer, and also she and I are organizing for the People's Social Forum. And as you know, part of what we're doing here at this regional forum is doing strategizing and visioning for the exciting People's Social Forum that's coming up. We also have Speaker Tony Clark, well known. Welcome. And we also have Matt Price, all the way from BC, and we're very excited about the work that Matt's been doing. And now that we have both of our speakers here, welcome to Ajamu and Camilla. I'll be introducing Camilla. We were a little bit nervous, Ajamu, but really happy that you're here. And you're not late, as it happens. We did start a little bit late. But I'll call Camilla up. We're very pleased to have Camilla. Camilla was involved in the very first London Regional Social Forum, and I'm actually very proud of the work that she's done. Camilla and I worked together. I met her when we were both on the executive of the Society of Graduate Students at UWO, and we were both involved with the Canadian Federation of Students. I know Some of you in the room will know the fine activist work that the CFS does. So Camilla is a longtime social justice activist and academic who cut her political teeth as an organizer in London. And she was part of groups including Counter Striker, PER, and Oxfam UWO. And as I said, she was part of the organizing for the first London RSF in 2005. She completed her bachelor, her BA and MA in media studies at Western. And then she went on to pursue doctoral studies in political science at York University, where she wrote her dissertation, which was inspired by her experiences with the Canadian alter globalization movement. And I can tell you, because I've heard Camilla talk about her research, I think you'll all find it incredibly rich and incredibly useful for us strategizing as how to move forward and build movement. Over the past year, she's worked as a researcher and media studies lecturer in Toronto, where she now lives. Her talk this evening is going to draw on her ongoing research to speak about the ways in which contemporary culture and its emphasis on speed and efficiency has such an impact upon our collective and individual capacities as activists to think long-term, to consult the past for relevant lessons, and to build lasting social movement infrastructure. So again, Camilla, welcome.
Well, hello everyone. It is great to be here. I want to say thank you so much to the organizers and to all of you for being here today. I have to tell you that I'm feeling a lot of different feelings standing here. I feel happy and humbled to be invited here to be your keynote speaker today. London, like Patty said, is my hometown of sorts. Like Patty said, it is where I cut my political teeth. It is where I radicalized some, 13 years ago or so, yeah. So I have a permanent soft spot for London, I guess you could say, for City of the Black Squirrel, I guess if the One Men Social Movement campaign had its way. So I was invited here to speak partly about my experiences and my reflections on activism, and also to talk about the ways in which I have analyzed the experiences and reflections on activism of others. The many generous respondents, including some people in this room, in fact, that I have had the opportunity to speak with for my dissertation. And so this research that I have contributed to the literature I want to share with you today, it was something that I began as a master's student right here in London, Ontario, when I started the communications program at Western, and then, as Patty mentioned, continued through my doctoral studies at York in political science. So now I like to think of myself as an activist scholar and something of a public intellectual, if you'll indulge me. And my overarching interests are, again, as Patty mentioned, in the political economic system, of course, capitalism, a critical study thereof, the study of culture, social activism, and importantly for me, the study of time and temporality. And I try to bring them all together, and I'm going to try to elucidate to you today the ways in which I do this, hopefully successfully. So one of the things that really interests me in relation to how we organize and how we think as social justice organizers has to do with what I argue is the pervasive culture of speed. In fact, I argue that there is a hegemonic speed fetish that is all around us, that pervades capitalist culture, and that we as organizers cannot help but be in some ways influenced by. And I'm going to suggest that some of these ways can be potentially deleterious to the ways in which we organize collectively. And there are three areas of activist practice related to time and temporality that interest me in particular. And I think as Patty alluded to already, the first one is our capacity to think and to plan for the long term. So these are activities and values related to the future. The other one is our capacity to consult the past, particularly the past of the left and of social movements, for relevant lessons that we can use in the here and now. So this, of course, has to do with the area of time, the past. And then lastly, I think perhaps most significantly for us today, but I think the strategic planning stuff is really salient as well, the question of duration, durability, and sustainability. So our capacity as individuals and as collectives to come together in more than just temporary fleeting alliances or for the duration of one event only. So this is what I would call the building of lasting social movement infrastructure, or to use the term used by Alan Sears, who is a comrade and an academic in Toronto, infrastructures of dissent. I really like that phrase, so I try to use it whenever possible. So the ability to build lasting infrastructures of dissent is something that is really of interest to me based on my experiences as an activist and also as a scholar, as I mentioned. So I am happy to be here to share all of this research, but I was also invited to come here and speak as a keynote speaker, not only on account of my research, but also partly because, as Patty mentioned, I was one of the organizers of the original 2005 Regional Social Forum, and I'm certainly proud to have had that experience. And there are certain lessons that I think I drew as a result of having participated in that organizing, and as a result of also having participated in the ensuing regional social forums and having actually gone to Nairobi in 2006 to participate in the World Social Forum. Now, I want to take you back. Well, the year that the first regional social forum happened was 2005. But in 2005, it had been 4 years since I had first arrived at Western to study communications. More significantly than that, 2001 was also the year that really ignited the movement that I study, that I'm really interested in, namely the Canadian anti, or as I call it, the ultra-globalization movement. That was the movement generation that I radicalized as part of, and that really had a profound influence on myself as an activist. I really strongly identified as an anti-globalization activist. And is there anyone here in the room who had a similar experience, whose first radical identity was as part of that movement? One person, Atle. Okay, well, it really brings to our attention the idea of movement generations, and that was my generation and Atle's as well. So subsequently, the history of the anti-globalization or ultra-globalization movement in the Canadian context became the subject of my doctoral dissertation, which I just completed a year ago, right? And it is called Time, Technology, and Troublemakers, Fast Activism and the Ultra-Globalization Movement in Canada. And hopefully it's going to come out as a book sometime at the end of next year, so you can keep your eyes out for that. The history of the Canadian ultra-globalization movement has not yet been documented specifically in the context of Turtle Island, to prefer that term. To a lot of you in this room, depending on what age you are, it may be ancient history. If you are 30 and below, it may be something that you're completely unfamiliar with, or it may be something that, again, you're really familiar with depending on when you were born and which movement generation you belong to. Certainly, having had experience teaching undergraduate students over the past year, I can tell you that the late teenagers and people in the early 20s can't distinguish between their Battle of Seattle Thunder, Zapatista, and Cointreau's. So to them, it really is ancient history, and it really is kind of shocking how quickly the collective memory of struggles can dissipate. So part of what I want to do today is slightly recuperate that history and then also focus on some of that temporal aspects of organizing that I'm really so interested in. And so in the spirit of reflecting and honoring our organizing traditions and our past, I want to start by just acknowledging perhaps what seems to be a basic fact, but perhaps again not known to everyone, namely that the social forum and the social forum movement that grew up around it, in fact, grew out of the anti-globalization movement. And again, a lot of you may know already that this movement is commonly said to have started in 1999, in November, with the protests against the World Trade Organization in Seattle. But fewer people seem to know that the roots of that movement can actually be traced back to way earlier. We can trace them back to the 1980s, and I certainly do this in my dissertation, when we talk about the early anti-free trade struggles. And Tony Clark, who's in the audience, is certainly a major, major part of that struggle, and one of my generous respondents for my research. The inaugural events in the history of the Canadian ultra-globalization movement are also not Seattle necessarily. We have our own history of how this organizing unfolded in this country, and based on the responses of my respondents, who were already active at the time, the two events that we can perhaps trace the beginning of the anti-globalization movement in Canada too would be the campaign against the Multilateral Agreement on Investments that unfolded in 1997 to 1998. And then, does anyone know what the second one was in 1997? I'm just curious if anyone can guess. It was a major protest, and A lot of my respondents said that that was the event that started the anti-globalization movement in Canada. Lorraine, you think you know? What is it?
Was it the APEC protest?
That's right, yeah. The APEC protest that happened in Vancouver in '97, it was one of the first protests that the now notorious anarchist activist Jagmeet Singh, it was probably his first protest. It was brutally repressed by the RCMP with pepper spray, and Jean Chrétien subsequently made the notorious comment about putting pepper on his plate. Some of you may remember that comment. It was a huge scandal, the amount of violence that was unleashed against activists, and it is ironic in a sad kind of way because there was huge uproar across Canada about the use of pepper spray against protesters. And if we look back on it from the perspective of all of the repression that has occurred over the years, all the way up to the G20 and beyond, it seems like you can't really compare the two, but it seems like we have almost gotten used to the amount of repression that is meted out against activists. But apart from the repression, that was the generation that took up the battle cry of fighting against global corporations and fighting so-called free trade with fresh vigor and youthful idealism and energy. So we called ourselves a movement of movements, bringing together various groups and organizations and movements as well as individuals, united by the internet, which was the tool that this movement had at its disposal really for the first time. So we were really drunk on power that the internet provided all of us. And over time, I have come to adopt a certain critique that I like to call the dark side of the digital, although I didn't come up with that term, that I'll elaborate on a little bit later. But the point is that we are all really united, although we were coming from all kinds of different movements and organizations, we were united in the desire to not stop or oppose globalization per se, although that is certainly how the mainstream media painted the movement as anti-globalization, about a bunch of Luddites and reactionaries, etc. But what we really wanted to do, and what we all in this room still continue to want to achieve, is to democratize the processes of economic globalization and to make sure that what it's really about is people rather than profits. And certainly that was one of the slogans that we adopted. So just to give you a very brief idea, because I don't want to use my time to summarize the historical research that I accomplished for my dissertation, after the anti-MAI campaign and the APEC protests, of course, Seattle had a huge influence on the Canadian movement. And then some of you may recall the subsequent mobilization took place in Windsor, Ontario, against the Organization of American States, followed almost immediately on its heels by the mobilization against the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that happened in Washington. And some of you in this room, I know for a fact, were there. So that was the year 2000. The following year was the highlight of the movement. I was just finishing high school, and this is when the fight against free trade culminated in the protest against the free trade area of the Americas in Quebec City. And this was in the spring of 2001. Now, although Quebec has had 2 social forums since then, it was back then in 2001 in Quebec City that the People's Summit, which was organized as part of the protests, actually brought together French and English-speaking activists from across the country. And this actually hasn't happened since then. So it's been about 13 years, and it's going to happen again in Ottawa next month. So of course, this is not to say that Quebecois activists haven't participated, but as a full-on outreach to bring together these 2 solitudes, it has been a really long time, so it's really exciting that Quebecois and English Canada is coming together in Ottawa in August. The year 2001 was significant for yet another really important reason from the perspective of all of us gathered here today. As was already mentioned, it was the year that the first World Social Forum was organized, and it was held in its initial destination, which is Porto Alegre, Brazil, where they have participatory budgeting. When it was organized, the intention of the people who put it on was to offer those who came an open space, an arena for discussion, for networking, for learning from each other, and really importantly, for trying to come together and forge strategies on how to achieve a future that is alternative to the one that corporate-driven capitalist globalization was putting forward. Another world is possible, we proclaimed, and this continues to be the slogan of the World Social Forum, really speaking to our common intention to try to previsage and prefigure the kind of future that we all want, the kind of world that is free of violence, free of discrimination, of exploitation, of greed, etc. So this slogan, I think, continues really to inspire and to inform our efforts today. And really, in altered phrasing, it is still the slogan of the London Regional Social Forum, where we say, the future is ours. And I really love that framing, and I'm 100% behind it. But as an academic, I have to be something of a downer in that I have a critical perspective that speaks to some of the limitations on our capacity to envisage an alternative future. And this is what I want to talk a little bit about today. Because I think if we are honest with ourselves, our ability to plan strategically for the long term is our Achilles heel in a lot of different ways. And I think that that's because it is a really damn difficult thing to do. I think that there are various reasons why that is. From my perspective, effective long-term strategic planning, and this is partly based on my experiences and then borne out by over 70 semi-structured interviews that I carried out with really excellent, outstanding, committed activists all across Turtle Island. So from my perspective, there are certain things that are required in order to enable us to plan strategically in an effective way. It requires time. Not a lot of us have that much time, and the way in which we prioritize certain areas of our organizing and certain areas of our lives could perhaps be revised. But one of the things that I come across over and over again as someone who is interested in time and temporality is how little time we have as activists, because most of us are doing this work on our free time pro bono, which puts some limitations on us. So time. It seems like an obvious one, and yet so significant. I think that effective strategic planning also requires the capacity and the willingness to engage in deep critical reflection. And that is partly also a function of having the time to indulge, almost the luxury of time to do so, but it's also how much are we actually willing to invest in reflection. And I think that that is actually one of the beauties and one of the opportunities that we have this weekend, and again we'll have in August in Ottawa, that we are not here necessarily to organize a response to the next urgent development that may be happening in the world, that we actually have the time, that the purpose of us being here is actually to reflect and strategize. So I think that this is the time, this is the opportunity to do so. Another thing that I think requires is collective memory. And this is one of the areas of temporal activity that, based on my research, I have found to actually be generally valued by activists, in that we can already readily recognize that it's important to know the history of past struggles in order not to reinvent the proverbial wheel over and over again, and to not repeat the mistakes of the past. However, while most of the activists I have spoken to almost uniformly upheld the value of knowing the past and learning from history, when it comes to actually putting it into practice, activists don't necessarily walk the walk all the time. The last one is solid movement infrastructure. And I think that is one of the most important ones, if not the most important one. All of these conditions really are important, interdependent, and necessary, but I want to suggest that the temporal dynamics of late capitalism, the culture in which we are all operating, and in particular, what I would argue is this hegemonic obsession with speed that drives capitalism and characterizes capitalist culture, rubs off on us in ways that we are often not really fully aware of. And so part of what I want to accomplish here today with my brief talk is to shed some critical light on some of these dynamics and some of these cultural propensities that we almost inevitably end up displaying by function of operating in this capitalist society. Because I think we shouldn't think that as activists we are fully above and beyond the kind of biases that the capitalist society perpetuates. And I think it's really important that we become self-critical and self-aware so that we can transcend them. So all of these issues put together are really at the heart of my dissertation, which, as I mentioned, I completed a year ago. And my PhD was in political science, although, as I mentioned, I completed my BA and my MA here at Western in communication studies. But I was always really interested in the political economy of communication and trying to tie it with the study of social movements somehow. So the theoretical framework, and I'm not going to go into this at length at all because I think I would bore you to tears, but I think it is important to talk about some of the systematic conditions, processes, and forces at play that really drive this speed fetish, as I would put it to you. And of course, the culprit at the bottom is capitalism. Capitalism is a system, I don't think I necessarily have to tell you, I'm sure that a lot of you already know this, but it is a system premised upon competitive relations that requires that one capitalist be faster than his or her rival. And it really requires that capital turnover time, so to speak, be accelerated. So this is about accelerating the cycles of production, distribution, and consumption, because the faster you can generate a profit, the faster you can reinvest it, and the faster it will turn up a profit in its turn. Now, for Marxists, of course, that also has to do with trying to extract surplus value from workers, and this is known as the labor theory of value, just to throw some academies in there. But in a nutshell, I think Benjamin Franklin perhaps was the one who summarized it in the most pithy way when he said that capitalism loves speed because time is money. So in my thesis, in my dissertation, I look at the capitalist dynamics that drive this propensity to fetishize speed, efficiency, and increasingly adopt a mode of organizing that is in line with some of these biases. So I would argue that all of us living in a capitalist culture, our ways of thinking are actually inevitably shaped by some of these biases. And accordingly, we are becoming increasingly preoccupied with short-term concerns and immediate gratification. Simultaneously, the relatively slow oral tradition, with its emphasis on the value of the past and on duration, I think is becoming dangerously and increasingly marginalized. I think the media that we have here, I mentioned before that the anti-globalization movement was the first one that had the internet at its disposal. And we certainly made full use of it, and as an activist, I certainly make the use of the internet every single day, and I can't imagine doing activism without it. But at the same time, I think, and there's a lot of scholarship to support my contention, that the instantaneous social media that are so ubiquitous in our society today lend themselves far more easily to rapid, massive mobilizations and to the sending of vast amounts of information over distances really quickly. The dark side, again, of the digital, on the other hand, is that they tend to, by the same token, marginalize, if not almost obliterate, media that are more appropriate to collective memory, to spirituality, to dialogue, to tradition. These are all aspects of oral culture that used to be strong, but over time have been appropriated through the production of technological space. And that is what I would call the dark side of the digital, to use that phrase yet again. So again, my point is that the speed imperative that characterizes and drives capitalism as one of its very foundational dynamics can be observed not only in relation to the systemic pressures of fast capitalism, as some scholars call it, and the decisions made by political leaders who have to respond that much more quickly in the age of instantaneous communication. I argue that we actually can see it in the dominant ways that we engage in political organizing. As I mentioned, I believe, and I think a lot of you would agree with me, that our culture, being a capitalist consumer culture, prioritizes individualistic and immediate gratification way of thinking or common sense that, again, cannot help but shape social movements and all of us. With many forms of activist organizing prioritizing speed, so organizing really quickly and really massively, and spatial reach, so over long distances, over duration and sustainability. So we have a mode of engagement that is really focused on one-offs or event-based mobilizations that certainly inspire and are really valuable, there's no doubt about that. However, often fall short of the kind of long-term, sustained, committed action that I believe is necessary to effect transformative, profound social change. So this kind of mode of organizing is what I am calling fast activism. And it entails adopting a cause du jour, and then very vigorously spending some time organizing a film screening, an event, a festival, etc. And then all too often afterwards, although we certainly have learned something and we do feel better about ourselves, moving on to the next cause available to choose from in a plethora of social causes in what one commentator has called the theme park of radical action. And it was not without bitterness that I had a conversation with a comrade and a friend who is here in the room. And the way that he summarized this mode of organizing was one-time deal. And that phrase really stuck with me. It was actually Anthony, not to put you on the spot, but it was Anthony who said it. And it stuck with me, and it partly informed some of the critical reflections that I subsequently put in my dissertation. So yet again, this mode of organizing is really more about temporary and ad hoc modes of organizing that I think often entail far less long-term, laborious, unsexy, invisible labor than some of the really big one-off mobilizations. And again, I do not by any means want to discount those mobilizations. I think they're really important. But I think it really is about our priorities and where we spend most of our time. And I think that there is a certain tendency, particularly among the current and the young generation of activists, to hop from issue to issue and from event to event without the sustained long-term commitment to one issue, which may have its ups and downs, but even if it's not sexy, I think that we should still be working on it. So, the future is ours. That is the slogan of the Regional Social Forum, and I really love that. Like I said, I think it is a powerful slogan. And if you go on the website and you read the statements prepared for the Ottawa Social Forum, it says that it will be a first, an ambitious gathering of peoples with the audacious goal of opening space for a different sort of future. And that is fantastic. That is what we all want. And I'm going to Ottawa and I'm going to participate in all of the discussions to help this future planning come along. But my academic training is something I want to share with you right now, because I have actually investigated this capacity for long-term thinking from the perspective of how our ability to think about the future and to organize ourselves in the dimension of time, including the future, a so-called futurity, has evolved over the past several hundred years. And I'm not going to go into a lengthy explanation, because that would take far too long. But as Yogi Berra is credited with having said, the future ain't what it used to be. And I think that is an important consideration for us to think about today when we do want to say that the future is ours. Because how we think about the future today and our capacity to plan it has changed, and not necessarily in ways that are helpful to social movements. So I just want to spend about 3 to 5 minutes giving you a very, very compacted version of how our conception of the future has evolved. Okay. So, in ancient and medieval societies, the future was basically understood as predetermined and preconceived by divine forces, or by the weight of the past and tradition, or by both simultaneously. So, every earthly event and the fate of every single individual was understood as predetermined according to divine providence, so that it was completely inflexible, and trying to challenge it was going against the will of God. This started to change around the late 17th century, when the so-called future determinism of the Middle Ages started to give way to a new temporal orientation, one that one scholar has called the colonization of the future. And a lot of it had to do with economics, and particularly the rise of the new merchant class, which encouraged a new and more active engagement with the future and its uncertainties. Because the idea that divine providence would somehow oversee how events unfold was no longer satisfactory to a class whose profits were now at stake. So the creation of profits really depended upon greater foresight and planning, and in turn, that demanded a vision of the future that was neither fixed nor understood as being beyond human control. So time was no longer seen as a domain of the Almighty, it became seen as a merchant's time, or really a commodity that could be saved, traded, or sold just like any other. A category that you could apply a cost calculus to. Not to be too deterministic, economists from a Marxist perspective, there's also the social and cultural plane on which we understand that the advent of the Enlightenment actually helps to advance this radical reorientation in how we understand the future, our future time perspective. So first you had the grand narrative, again to use some academic jargon, the grand narrative of progress. It emerged with the Enlightenment, of course, and it replaced the previous notion of nature's cycles or Christian salvation in the afterlife. And instead, it promised better things to come here on earth, as encapsulated by the Enlightenment's idea of the progressive movement of history. So just as the center of temporal gravity, so to speak, started to shift from the past to the future over 2 centuries ago, in the 20th century, just last century, it started to shift quite profoundly yet again. And here we can talk about a qualitative shift toward what some scholars have called the obsessive present-mindedness of contemporary capitalist culture. Others have called it the extended present or the collapse of the future even. Certainly it came about partly because of the collapse of the myth of progress, partly as a result of the 2 world wars that dealt a fatal blow to the idea that we're moving in a better direction. And then starting in the 1970s and 1980s, you had the advent of postmodern culture, which dealt yet a further blow to the idea that there are grand narratives structuring the way in which humanity goes about its business. So combined with those social cultural developments outlined above, technology also played a really big role, and this is really interesting for me as a scholar of media and political science. Because in the 1970s, you had an information revolution in that it became possible to send vast amounts of information over distances instantaneously to a degree previously unprecedented. And so when you put all of these forces together, economic, technological, and cultural, what we get is a qualitative shift in our dominant understanding of time and temporality. And this, I should probably mention, should be restricted to advanced capitalist countries like Canada and others. In pockets of the world, there are different ways of conceptualizing and organizing in time, so my argument is limited to our advanced, technologically advanced society. So there is this growing body of interdisciplinary scholarship that I am really interested in that brings together various fields to study time and temporality, itself a very interdisciplinary field, to suggest that we are living through the latest wave of a quintessentially modern process that is called the general process of social acceleration. You have to forgive me for throwing yet another academic term at you. So this process is actually not itself new, and neither is globalization. They are certainly entwined. But all of the scholarship and all of the experiences that we have had, and I'm sure this resonates with a lot of you, points to the fact that in a society such as ours, that is penetrated by ubiquitous, instantaneous media of communication, there is a certain sense in how we experience time that is shifting. And it is a shift away from what used to be called clock time of the industrial era to so-called network time of our contemporary global, fast capitalist society. And it is a society that is marked by really high rates of change, where the future becomes almost ungovernable. In that it is really difficult for us to imagine what the future will look like, let's say 5 years into the future, or 10 years into the future, because of this radical future uncertainty that we seem to be experiencing, partly as a result of this accelerating rate of change, accelerating technology, and the general sense of consumer capitalism and the cultural condition that it promotes. So what I'm saying is that the limit of the foreseeable is basically moving closer and closer to the present, and this forecloses in a lot of important ways our capacity to envisage an alternative future. As politics basically enters a mode of just muddling through, and temporary and provisional solutions are increasingly taking place of larger political designs. So, having settled this, what has been the reaction of civil society to this radical future uncertainty, precariousness, instability, and incapacity to feel like we have a sense of where the future is going and how we're going to control it? Well, this is certainly something that I have investigated as I was completing my doctoral dissertation, and I can tell you that there is a vast body of literature penned by business consultants and business writers for business audiences, spelling out various tools and techniques on how to manage and plan that future uncertainty. And yet, when you search for comparable tools and techniques written by activists for activists, there is very little. In fact, my research tentatively suggests that activists in the US seem to be somewhat more skilled at having various tools of strategic planning than activists in Canada. I haven't investigated this systematically, so I cannot really account for the difference. It is an anecdotal piece of my research, but it is an interesting thought, and if anyone has any ideas why that is, I'd be interested to knowing. But the point is that industry, business has really embraced ways of trying to manage future uncertainty, and one of the ways in which they do this entails the practice of so-called scenario planning, where you basically brainstorm and evaluate future possible scenarios, decide which one is more likely, and how are you going to react if it should come about. And some of you may have read recently that the Pentagon is getting ready for a variety of scenarios that are going to emerge as a result of catastrophic climate change. So well-funded institutions that are on the other side of the struggle that we are all engaged in are getting better and better at strategic planning, and we have to do the same thing. And so I think that it has to do with our capacity building and also trying to become more self-reflexive, recognizing some of our shortcomings and then trying to redress them. When it comes to the capacity to plan in long term, a lot of people that I have interviewed had really great, pithy things to say about it. And a lot of them were similarly, like myself, quite frustrated about our demonstrable shortcoming in this regard. And a lot of you will know this, the author of the quote that I'm about to quote to you, a longtime union activist with the postal workers, friend to many of you, Dave Blakely. So he identified a tendency that he sees as pervasive within contemporary activism that he called the addiction to urgency. And I thought that was a really pretty phrase, and I use it quite a lot in my dissertation. This is the kind of tendency that really militates against our ability collectively to think and plan for the long term. And so as he noted, quote, there's not a lot of strategic discussions because the urgency, of course, of completing an action and taking it on and doing it can take a lot of energy out of people, and often we don't debrief afterwards. The whole notion of strategy is quite avoided because we just go through this repetition of action to action and repeating ourselves and repeating ourselves. So I think that his comment confirms that insofar as strategy involves a long-term plan involving multiple tactics, the capacity to craft strategy in these conditions can become reduced. And when I was trying to investigate how far into the future activists plan when they do come together to put together campaigns, the furthest time frame into the future was 1 year and nothing beyond. Actually, I shouldn't say this because just recently I had a really good conversation with a comrade and a colleague at the Historical Materialism Conference in Toronto, someone who has been involved in the Montreal student strike and made it very clear that they had planned it for 2 years. And I would love to hear examples to the contrary, but I have interviewed activists from the labor movement, from a variety of different movements, and I've actually found out that funding and a degree of institutionalization is actually not a factor that can predict whether or not a group of activists is capable of transcending that 1 year strategic or tactical planning timeframe. So it seems to be a generalized kind of condition that we are all struggling with. But the future is ours. I want to believe it, and I do believe it, and I think that we can make this a reality. And I certainly don't have all of the answers as to how we can overcome some of the challenges that I have outlined, but I do believe that the RSF is the opportunity, an amazing opportunity for us to all take the time to think reflexively and think critically and think strategically and see if maybe, just maybe, we can get beyond the 1 year planning time frame, beyond just the next social forum that's coming up in August that we are all certainly looking forward to. I think one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want to get out of it? When the last of the activists get into their cars or on the buses and go back to their hometowns, what do we want to have to show for all of the amazing organizing effort that has gone on for the last several months? Many of us will be tremendously inspired at the end of this weekend and again in August. We will have learned so much. We will have reinvigorated our desire to change the world. We will have met new comrades, forged new connections, and all of that is tremendously valuable and significant. But I would like to suggest that it needn't and that perhaps it shouldn't stop there. I would like to see more happen as a result of all of this organizing effort. And I'm just going to throw it out there, but perhaps something like a tentative agenda. How to move forward. A 2 year plan, maybe. A 5 year plan, I dare not suggest. But again, as I suggested, there do seem to be attempts in pockets of activism here and there, recognizing that we are limited in our ability to think for the really long term, not just the 1 year in advance. There are people who are increasingly recognizing that this is a limitation on our capacity, and that we have to become self-reflexive about this if we really are serious about provisioning and creating a new alternative future. I also wanted just to close about briefly speaking to this other important component that I see as a central element in our capacity to make the future really ours. And this is a particularly salient point for myself as someone who, as I mentioned, radicalized as part of the ultra-globalization movement. Because this is a movement, like I mentioned, that's really excelled at speedy communications thanks to the internet, which was then brand new, our greatest toy and instrumental tool. But it did not necessarily excel at making the connections, making the organizational connections in the networks last in the long run. And it was 10 years after that fateful year of 2001 that activists in New York City decided to permanently occupy Wall Street to protest the politics of austerity that were initiated in the wake of the 2007 financial crisis. Now, this protest actually had some continuities with the AGM in a lot of significant ways, not the least of which was the influence of the Vancouver-based Adbusters magazine, which was the hip magazine to have on carrying your arm if you were a member of the AGM cycle. And so much like the AGM spread out from Seattle outward in '99, the news cycle began in NYC and then diffused transnationally, including to Canada, of course, where there was a wave of contention, and it became known as the Occupy movement, of course, as you know. Now, interestingly, from my perspective, that same month, in 2011, in the column titled Occupy Wall Street, Lessons from the Anti-Globalization Movement, Naomi Klein, a central figure to the AGM and the keynote speaker in Ottawa next month, waxed enthusiastic about the future prospects of the Occupy movement. She commended the protesters for learning from the mistakes that we had committed as members of the ultra-globalization movement. And this learning of lessons, she said, can be evidenced or manifested, first of all, by Occupy's commitment to nonviolence. And second, and from my perspective more significantly, by the choice of sustained physical presence as its fixed target. And so here she actually ends up articulating a critique that runs along lines similar to my own concerning fast activism. And she noted that the anti-globalization movement was oriented primarily to organizing protests against transient international summits that it would, quote, regularly appear, grab world headlines, then disappear, making it easier for the movement to actually fall apart behind 9/11. By contrast, she argues, Occupy has time to put down roots, which makes it a lot harder to sweep them away, even if they get kicked out of one physical space. 2 months later, after this column was published, a wave of evictions ended most of the Occupy camps, at least the camps themselves. In Toronto, at least, and I know in many other cities as well, but I'm familiar with the Toronto case, efforts to maintain the momentum and maintain everything that Occupy was all about continued, as did the General Assemblies, although in a new location, slightly altered rules. But over the ensuing months, they grew increasingly feeble, and a lot of the activists involved in the movement disappeared, but certainly not all. And those that persist today ended up attaching themselves to existing movements and existing organizations, and a lot of them are active in Indigenous solidarity and environmental movements today. And that is great. And I think that there is a certain lesson that we can draw from this experience about duration and about organizational sustainability. That is really important. And so I just want to end on this note, and to do this, I want to draw upon a recent blog entry by the activist David Bush. I'm not sure if any of you have seen that piece circulated on some social media. And it is the argument that he advances in it is one that resonates with some of the things I have been saying and with my own beliefs and experiences. He basically makes the point that vibrant, strong social movements are a combination of that laborious, unsexy, invisible, and not always immediately gratifying mode of engagement, mixed with moments of spontaneous political upsurge, of energy and enthusiasm. Again, I want to suggest that while that is the case, given the present cultural condition in which we all find ourselves, unfortunately, in the system of capitalism, our tendency, more or less consciously, has been to move increasingly toward that short-term, spontaneous mode of upsurge, rather than putting our energies and our efforts into the long-term, laborious mode of organizing. And I think, again, that it's really important that we be self-reflexive and self-critical about this, because as I do believe, and as I mentioned, I think that this is how real profound change is created. One way forward, and again, I do not pretend to have all the answers. There are so many people here in this room who have way more experience and insight than I do. But I think that perhaps one way forward out of this myopic impasse are membership-based political organizations. And I have been living in Toronto, like Patty mentioned, for the last several years. In Toronto, we have had an experiment with membership-based political organization. It's called the Greater Toronto Workers' Assembly. I'm a part of its campaign for free and accessible transit that has been going on for the last several years, and that has been struggling with this lack of visibility and lack of sexiness because there isn't an extant transit movement on the ground in Toronto, so we have had a hard time promoting the idea of free transit, which is a long-term radical goal. And it's difficult to get people's minds wrapped around the idea that it is actually something that we could eventually win the same way that Canadians eventually got free public health care. Why can't we do the same thing for transit? That is the argument that we are making. But we understand that before we can really rally a lot of support for this idea, it is going to take a lot of time and a lot of one-on-one conversations and a lot of convincing of people that it is actually a possibility if we have enough political will and support. I think another strength of a dues-paying membership organization is that it actually does allow its members to have a much firmer sense of the capacity of its members. And I think that a strong sense of your organizational capacity is one of the keystones necessary for effective forming of strategy. To figure out what is to be done, it is necessary to answer the question by whom and how. So again, I think that the People's Social Forum will be a perfect time to talk about how the left organizes itself, how it orients itself towards struggle. And there are groups, even here locally, that give us much to be hopeful about. There are struggles that are going on, and we know that the people want something different, that there is a thirst for alternatives. And groups like the London Common Front and the Ontario Common Front, I think, are really great initiatives and cause for enthusiasm, and that they really bring people together in coalitions that I hope are going to last and will transcend this myopic type of tendency that I have been speaking about. So I think that what we really need to do at this People's Social Forum this weekend and then again in Ottawa and for the years to come, because I think that we will have social forums for years to come, is try to figure out ways of meaningfully connecting all of our struggles and advocating for new ones along the lines of shared practices. And echoing David Bush, I think perhaps in addition to forming membership organizations with dues, perhaps at the end of this weekend, at the strategy session on Sunday, there will be a proposal put forward for a campaign that everyone who will be in attendance will be willing to commit to and see through to the end. And I think that would be just great. And the point isn't necessarily the content of the campaign itself, but it really is about building ties that last, about binding long-term ties. Because when I look back at my experiences with the 2005 Regional Social Forum and the subsequent ones, I have to tell you that the knowledge I gained from the workshops has largely faded away, but what hasn't faded away are the connections that I established with some of the people. It's the sense of solidarity, of continuity, and of feeling like we are all part of this shared struggle. So I'm so happy to still be in contact with Patty, with Darius, with a number of other people in the audience, and I want to really encourage you this weekend, even if you are a shy person, to try to come out of your shell, because I think you will find, in retrospect, that you will end up agreeing with me that what really will matter at the end of this weekend is the kind of deep connections that you are able to forge with others, and the kind of commitment that you may wish to put forward to a cause that you're already a part of, or perhaps are about to become a part of. So although I don't always enjoy the writing and the guts of the philosopher Slavoj Žižek, I want to end by repeating the quote from him that he articulated during Occupy Wall Street in 2011. Quote, "What matters is the day after, when we will have to return to normal lives. Will there be any changes then? The only thing I'm afraid of is that we will someday just go home and then we will meet once a year." So I think that we don't necessarily want just another conference this weekend. We want to build something, whatever you want to call it, whatever the focus of it will be. We want something that is not going to stop either on Sunday or at the end of the Social Forum, People's Forum in Ottawa. Something that we will be proud and that we will have something to show for. So again, I want to encourage you to reach out to someone that you may not know, to strike up a conversation with strangers, to really try to establish this sense of solidarity. Because I think that is the most valuable thing that we're going to accomplish. And that is all part of our common efforts to prefigure a different world, and I really think that we can do it if we do it together. Thanks.
Well, Camilla, I think you can see why we invited Camilla this evening. She has just so skillfully woven together a number of key themes and things that are a concern to all of us, and I think the points about self-reflection, about how we look at ourselves as activists, how we build movement, how we look at not just short-term planning, but longer-term planning, and of course you wove together beautifully this regional social forum and the upcoming People's Social Forum. So thank you so much. You will find as a gift in there a book, thebestofrabble.ca, and some other paraphernalia from Rabble. And thank you so much again, Camilla. We are going to, we're diverging a little from the formal agenda. That's fine, we're all flexible as activists, I'm sure. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Please don't go away. We will have a Jamo speaking in about 10 minutes. come back so we can introduce and have our second keynote speaker, please. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. We'll move along now. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, good comrade, Ajamu Nangwaya. He's involved in organizing with the Network for the Elimination of Police Violence and the Organization for African International Solidarity. He currently works at Seneca College and writes on issues of race, gender, class, imperialism, international solidarity, and other public policy issues. He's also a former vice president of CUPE Ontario. He supports a class struggle trade unionism. And Ajamu Nangwaya.
Thank you, Anthony, for that introduction. Good afternoon, good evening, comrades. Good evening, comrades. Okay. Because we are comrades, and as such, we acknowledge that. As someone who's from the labor movement, we tend to say brothers and sisters, but then we're kind of pandering to the imperialism of the two genders. So when you say comrade, a comrade can be anyone, gender-wise. I'm very happy to be a part of this forum, and I'm also happy for the opportunity presented to me by the London Social Forum to have me here to share my thoughts on certain things. And what I'm really I'll be looking at over the next 25 to 30 minutes are some of the things that we need to do, the type of organizing that we need to engage in to build the possibility of a new society. Because that's the only way we're going to move forward, is that in the process of fighting the different forms of oppression, we have to build the embryonic structures for the future society. And as the comrade earlier was talking about, the lack of strategic planning in our movement, the preference for mobilizing over organizing, and later on I will kind of point to what are some of those things. There are 8 things I'll be looking at after doing my introduction. Are 8 things I'll point to as things that we need to organize around, or 8 themes that should guide our struggles. And one is we need to engage in critical mass public education towards the end of developing radical, revolutionary consciousness within the population, and there's a reason for that. Secondly, we need to develop activists and organize the training programs, because we're going to need the skills to do the work. And we also need to look at the different forms of oppression beyond capitalism and class politics in society. Because of course, we're not going to leave anyone behind. And what the fourth thing that we're looking at is the need to organize around the needs of people. And we expand on the reason for that. We also need to develop direct democracy and explore the General Assembly as a way to organize within neighborhoods, communities, but a way for us to pursue place-based organizing And 6, we'll look at the question of labor self-management and the development of an anti-capitalist economic program. Also, we can speak about change in Canada without looking at the labor movement, organized labor. We have to have a politics around organized labor. There may be obvious reasons for that, especially for those of us who are committed to the classless society, the stateless society, and as an anarchist, the self-managed society. Lastly, I will look at the role of the revolutionary intelligentsia, the role of organic intellectuals in our struggle, both the university-based ones as well as those in our movement. At this current time, we're witnessing the intensification of exploitation across multiple fronts or systems of oppression in Canadian society and across the globe. The neoliberal phase of capitalism is engaged in an attack on a number of fronts. We're seeing attack on our social programs, the weakening of labor laws, and working class organizations such as trade unions. We're also witnessing greater insecurity of our work life. We talk about precarious work, when we look at the level of unemployment and underemployment in society, we see that as a significant problem. But also what we're also seeing as part of the neoliberal turn of capitalism is the glorification, the elevation of the idea of me, myself, and I. The me is most important than the we. And it is not unusual because we live in a liberal capitalist society where the individual is God, where they encourage this idea of equality of opportunity. And usually when I talk to students and ask them, usually when I'm teaching like an equity course, why should we be committed to destroying equality of opportunities? Students are like, this is a class about equality or equity. Why would we be against equality of opportunity? But that's also a part of the liberal framework in which we live, and there are certain fundamental inequitable features of a society that organizes around equality of opportunity, as opposed to the socialist notion of equality of outcome or equality of condition. So you will always hear in this society, whether it's the captains of industry or the state managers, their focus is on equality of opportunity. And for those of us in the community, we may think that, oh, that's a good thing. Why would we want equality of opportunity? But we know that that idea doesn't talk about providing the resources so that we can have equitable outcomes based on the goals that you're seeking, whether it's education or other pursuits. So right now, one of the things that we're seeing, and the reason why it is important for us to interrogate capitalism in all the movements, is that capitalism is working in concert with the existing systems, whether we're talking about racism or white supremacy, whether we're looking at patriarchy, whether we're looking at ableism and other systems. The minute that, the way that capitalism is working today, we can see how it's intersecting or how it's working in collaboration with other systems. So if we have a politics that's only looking at, for example, racism, and we're not looking at the issue of capitalism or class exploitation, we cannot develop the type of movement that's going to achieve emancipation in the society. So, and it's very evident for us, the unacceptable conditions that are abroad in society. Whether we look at homelessness, whether we look at the precarious labor market, the general housing insecurity that exists, institutional attacks on the rights of women, racist and colonial policing, all of these things are going on. And in spite of the very disagreeable and oppressive condition in society, we don't have mass uprising going on in society. And the question for us is, why is that? Why, because some people say, well, experience will shape our consciousness, but our experience of exploitative work, our experience of a patriarchal society, and if we're talking about women experiencing the brunt of patriarchal oppression and domination, but it doesn't push us towards anti-system ideas. It doesn't, push us towards, for example, workers. The experience of exploitative work life and community life do not push them towards socialist conclusions. If anything, we are afraid, we are repulsed by notions around of socialism or strident anti-capitalist ideas. What accounts for that, for this development? Part of it, has to do with the fact that we, the oppressed, have been colonized. Our ideas, our ideological outlook, has been colonized by the dominant system of oppression. And there's Carter G. Woodson, an African-American historian and an educator. He had this to say about the condition in which, a condition in which one's thoughts, what are the outcomes when one's thoughts are controlled, conditioned by an external force. And this is what he has to say. When you control a person's thinking, you do not have to worry about their actions, or his or her actions. You do not have to tell him or her not to stand here or go yonder. She or he will find his or her proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him or her to the back door. He or she will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, she or he will cut one for, or his special benefit. The education of the oppressed makes it necessary. So when we live in a place like Canada, where we have a working class majority, and yet you have a majority of Canadians claiming to be middle class, the ruling class and their ideological program are the winners. They are winning. They are definitely winning when that can happen. And at the same time, we look even at the trade union movement. The organized labor is one of the biggest propagators of this idea that the working class are members of the middle class. How often do you hear major labor leaders talking about a working class trade union struggle, or pushing or advocating for the working class? Just like their partners in the NDP, the focus is on, we need to save the decline in middle class. My position, to hell with the middle class, because we are part of the working class, and that's the class that we're defending. But unfortunately, that's not where the wise ones in the NDP and the wise ones who are at the top of the labor movement are at. They are still caught up in the politics of respectability, attempting to convince the capitalists that there can be a partnership between the fox and the chicken. And we all know, at the end of the day, where the chicken is going to end up when they go and when they hang together in the same space. And we have seen that in the mid-1970s, once the capitalists no longer fear the working class being attracted to socialist or radical ideas, it reneged on that compact, that post-World War II compact, where capital and labor will collaborate. And I'm talking organized labor, collaborated to fight any presence of radical socialist presence in the labor movement, and organized labor and capital collaborated to promote imperialism abroad. Because when we have the trade unions in Europe and North America collaborating together and going with capital and going into third world country and promoting a capitalist approach to organizing, that was anti-communism at home and collaborating with imperialism abroad. But some of you may say, well, I think you're kind of exaggerating here about the extent to which the minds of the people have been colonized by the thinking of the ruling class. And you may say, well, comrade, what about Occupy? It resonated with a lot of people in North America, Canada, and the United States, and other people elsewhere were vibing in it. And some of you would say, that was a radical development. But I would say that the Occupy movement was actually a system preserving movement. It wasn't a radical departure. And, this is my reason for saying that is that when a movement develop a slogan, we are the 99%. In a capitalist society, what it is doing is pulling together members of the oppressed, the ruling class, and members of the oppressed. Obama is not a part of the 99% if you look at financial calculation and his wealth holding. The Supreme Court justices are not part of the 99, are not part of the 1%. They are part of the 99%. So how can we have ruling class elements, and even some major CEOs are not part of the 1%? So what we did was embrace an ideological framework that wouldn't disturb the political and ideological commitments of the working class. Because they've also embraced capitalist ideas. So when we, the 99% against that 1%, they just believe that all we need to do is just take care of the 1% and we will have a good society. All we need to do is to return to the golden age of the welfare state with greater regulations of company, a little higher taxes, and everything will be fine. That is what we are the 99% is about. When the focus was on corporate greed and not capitalist greed, which is a basic part of capitalism, in the minds of people, all we need to do is just deal with the banksters and their outrageous salaries and the fact that there are loopholes where they're not paying tax. The focus is not on the destruction of capitalism. Because if the Occupy movement raised that serious ideological question, a lot of working class people would say, whoa. I was with you until you started talking about let's do something about capitalism, because do you want us to go to Marxist or to Soviet style socialism? That's the only frame of reference people have. If we're not going to go the path of capitalism, it must be Soviet communism. But of course, those of us who embrace anarchism know that there is an option. There's another way to a socialist society beyond the state. So, I would contend that the Occupy movement wasn't a radical departure. I'm talking in terms of the mainstream part of it, because of course you had the anarchists and you had revolutionary socialists as a part of it, but the Occupy movement didn't force us to do any ideological revisioning in terms of how we are seeing society. Because even here in Canada, and I saw one poll saying, our pollster from a polling firm was saying that about 93% of Canadians, and to me that was shocking, identify with being a part of the middle class. How can we develop and advance a class politics when the members of the working class have the aspiration to be in a class that they can never be a part of? Because most of us who are born in the working class will die in the working class, irrespective of our aspiration. So we're in a period of time where it's fundamentally important for us to develop ideological clarity about what it is that we're doing. We shouldn't be afraid to speak plainly about the new society that we want. We shouldn't be have any reservation about critiquing capitalism. Because some people have this idea that if we are too strident in our critique of oppression, it may turn on the people. And I would point to the Black Panther Party, very strident in their anti-imperialism politics, very strident in their critique of capitalism, very strident in their critique of white supremacy. But they were organizing with the people and organizing around their needs, whether it's a breakfast program, whether it's providing services to deal with junkies, whether it's providing transportation service to take members of the community to prison visits. They were organizing around the needs of the people. The people didn't fear what they were saying. But, and what was also interesting, just to show the importance, and I was going to deal with that later, but the importance of organizing around the needs of the people and the threat that it posed to the system of domination was demonstrated in a now declassified document by J. Edgar Hoover, who was the longtime director of the FBI in the United States, instructing his agents to destroy the breakfast program because it may recruit impressionable young Africans into the Black Panther Party and may build credibility among the people. They didn't fear the guns because they were outgunned. Every time the Panthers and the police have a skirmish, the Panthers come out not too good. So they don't fear the Panthers with guns, but they fear when you organize with the people and organize around their needs. If we look even at the presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon and among the Shia there, or even if we look at Hamas in Gaza, it's a social service work that they're doing. Work, but of course, they're doing it for religious reasons, but that doesn't mean we can't take inspiration from what religious forces are doing. But it's the social services that they're doing that help legitimize their particular interpretation of Islam and organizing around the people. So there are lessons that we can take around organizing, around the needs of other people in society. So I'm going to deal with the things that I believe we need to do if we would like to build sustainable mass movement in Canada, and if we would like to start to present a radical, revolutionary option to the people. One is that what we're doing here, this is a public education space that we have created this weekend, and also what we'll be doing in Ottawa. We need to develop systematic education program where we know what it is that we're trying to achieve and do this throughout society. It means that we may go to PTAs. We may organize in college and university classrooms where we do guest lectures, and a lot of professors will take activists into the classroom. A lot of times they just don't know where to find people. But we, as part of our mass education, will find every available space, even if it's like 10 people, 15 people, even if it means going up to the public realm and going into even people's living room to talk to 5 or 6 people. Because what we're doing, in terms of what our sister was saying, that in terms of the type of planning, almost like with a certain military precision that we're going to take in terms of trying to engender a radical consciousness. But we need to put in place mass public education programs, because every day, 24/7, the ruling class, the members of the ruling class find ways to conscientize us into their belief. We have to counter that. We may not have may not own radio stations, but we have skills, we've got knowledge, and we've got energy. And if we mobilize more people into our movement, we can spread out throughout society and try to make our ideas acceptable. And there are other things that we'd have to do in addition to doing critical mass public education. Many of people who are on Facebook, we can use also those social media spaces. So instead of talking about, oh, I'm feeling blue today because I lost my partner, I lost my girlfriend and stuff, we use Facebook and other spaces as consciousness raising spaces and trying to encourage people offline into organizations to do the work of resistance. So that's like, we're working on ideological development. But secondly, we also need to develop activists and organizers training programs. A lot of people may not enter political activism because they feel they don't have the skills to do this type of work. So we have to provide the skills that people need to be effective activists. Many of us who enter political organizations or political activism enter it just green, and we just kind of muddle our way through until like 4 years or 5 years later, we kind of develop some level of skills, but even deficient in important areas of skill. What we're going to do today is to develop programs where we take a person from where they're at, and within 2 years, we have a well-trained activist, and while we're training this person, the person is also doing activist work. So you have the opportunity for feedback and for the person to realize what are some areas they need to develop in. But we must develop the skills, the knowledge, and also the attitude to make people more effective as organizers. So that's something that we often don't do, but we absolutely must engage in the development of our people who are going to do the revolutionary organizing. And as I mentioned earlier, too often in society, different groups in society will focus on one particular type of oppression, maybe the fight against racism, maybe the fight against patriarchy or homophobia, it's just like a one oppression frame. And of course, those of us on the left, we privilege the struggle against capitalism or class relations, which is inadequate, because how can we separate the exploitation of how can we separate capitalism or the fight against capitalism from the experience of racialized workers, indigenous workers in the labor market? How can we separate capitalism from labor exploitation of women? We're living in a society where women, or in the labor market, women earn much lower than men. Sexism is operating in that case as well as capitalist exploitation. But when we look at the condition of indigenous and racialized women in the labor market, we realize that when you disaggregate the statistics about the lower wages for women as a group, and you look at the condition of indigenous women and racialized women, you realize, holy shit, these women are even earning less. So there's something going on there. So the thing that we absolutely must develop is a multi-oppression framework to understanding oppression and understanding the path that we're going to use to effect our emancipation in the society. We cannot take the one oppression frame, because that can delve into some backward or socially backward type of politics, especially around the vulgar forms of identity politics that sometimes develop when you only have a one oppression understanding of exploitation in society. I mentioned earlier the need to organize around the needs of the people. I do not believe that feature of our struggle, or that needed feature of our struggle, can be exaggerated. One of the things that's very clear to those of us on the left, those of us who are socialists organized in the community, is that we're not really doing organizing work among the most oppressed in society. We're doing a lot of public education work, we do advocacy work, but we're not on a daily basis, unless you're working in NGOs, and I'm not including them in revolutionary work, because they have their constraints. I'm talking about those of us who are doing this work for free because we're ideologically committed to a just and free society. We are not on a daily basis organizing with people. When we talk about organizing people, we can look at the work of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the United States. When they went into the apartheid South in the 60s, they went and organized communities, which was very much different from Martin Luther King. Going in, you have a one-day action, you bring a lot of media, and hundreds of thousands of people, and then you fly out back. The SNCC activists were working on the ground, developing people's skills, their knowledge to organize their community. And once people have developed to a certain level, they move on to another community to organize the people and develop indigenous leadership. The model of organizing is something that we need to privilege. My comrade mentioned that in terms of this preference for mobilization. And if you're doing organizing, you will have to mobilize, because there are times where we have to go and challenge the forces in the streets or engage in certain action. But that's integrated into the day-to-day organizing that we're doing in communities, building people's skills, building people's knowledge, changing their attitude about themselves and society and their capacity for change. These are things that would happen if we're organizing around people's needs. So when we engage in an action, like a protest action, we will be able to bring thousands of people into the street, because we're organizing in community spaces, and we're in contact with the people. So if we're talking about educational reform, we may be able to bring thousands of people rather than a few hundred people protesting at the government education ministry or school or some educational facility. We would have people that make it look like our ideas resonate among the people. So it's fundamentally necessary for us to do that type of organizing. Those of us in Toronto, we are very much aware of the rental market, and we're also aware of certain communities where racialized working class people live, where the housing is not the greatest, but the rent is very expensive. Can you imagine if we start to organize the people? We start to organize tenants, which, is a group of anarchist comrades in Toronto are doing that in the community of Parkdale. But it's something that we need to do on a mass level, where people may engage in a rent strike across a neighborhood or across a region of the city as a political action. If there are repairs that are going undone, we take that money and fix up the place and give the receipt to the employer, to the landlord about, on the repair that we have done. What we're doing is that even though fighting for better housing may seem like, oh, that's not really a big class struggle thing, what we're doing is preparing the people for larger battles. Because if the people are able to see that collective action can win change in this little area, then they will have the confidence to take on bigger and more taxing issues. Because we're building their confidence, we're building their organizing skills, and they can use that to seek change. The next thing I would like to highlight is the question of what type of political relationships are we going to develop as people? It's very clear to the working class and to large sections of the working class that the political system is not meeting their political needs. You will have members of the ruling class talking about the democratic deficit, and what they're saying is that people are running away from the polls. They're not going out to vote, so we're having a democratic deficit. They are not interested in people participating in the electoral system to contribute to policy orientation of the government. What they're concerned about is that if people run away from the polls, it will delegitimize the system. Because can you imagine if at the provincial level or the federal level, only 25% of Canadians go out and vote, what that would mean? It would undermine the legitimacy of the system. Well, one of the things that people are very clear about is that the political system cannot and is not delivering the type of public policies that they want. Affordable or free post-secondary education, access to social housing, better finance schools at the elementary and secondary level, free or affordable transportation. These are the things that people want, but that's not what they get. They get tax cuts and they get weakened labor laws, things that don't benefit the working class in this country. So people are not voting. But if we're going to develop an alternative, an embryonic political system, an embryonic relationship that would mimic the liberated society, how are we going to go about doing that? I'm arguing that we need to start to develop political institutions that engage in direct democracy, whether it's at the neighborhood level or if we're going to use the existing ward, the boundaries that they have for the existing wards. But we can start to develop the General Assembly, similar to what Occupy was doing. And to me, that was an important contribution of the Occupy movement discussion. So even though I was critical of them, the notion of the people assembling together and making collective decision, I think it's the lasting, significant contribution that Occupy has made to our struggle. Though I'm not sure that a lot of people are clued in on that lesson and try to utilize that direct democratic practice in our organizations and in organizing in general. But we need to develop democratic structures that are parallel to the existing democratic, political, liberal, capitalist democratic system that is here, that is contesting that system for power. Because we need a space where the people can develop their deliberative skills, where people can come together and set common policies that can be used to fight the system, to force them to accept some of these things. But at the same time, our long-term goal, is to work to undermine, delegitimize this political system. For us, as revolutionaries, there's no such thing called peaceful coexistence between a system that's oppressive and a system that's trying to assert itself. We should work to destroy capitalism. We should work to liquidate liberal capitalist democracy. If we say we believe in peaceful coexistence, it's only a tactical thing because we're weak now, and if we should be saying that, then of course they may come against us with all their might. But again, the people organized, we can resist whatever challenge that are coming out of the dominant system. So we definitely need to start to explore with different democratic practices, and I believe direct democratic assembly of the people is the way for us to go. That will put us into direct contact with the people in society. And again, it wouldn't be anything strange because when we're organizing around the needs of the people, we would utilize the assembly system as a space where we determine collective needs of the neighborhood and where we use the federative principle of bringing together neighborhoods or wards to deal with issues that go beyond just one territorial boundary. So we need to do these things, but again, it calls for a rethinking of the way we do activism. It calls for a different type of commitment. The revolutionary Kwame Ture, more popularly known as Stokely Carmichael, when he was passing through Toronto in the 1980s doing his lecture, one of the things he always reminded us that organization is the weapon of the oppressed. We're not going to win. We're not going to engage in revolution making without organizations. To me, that's the seed of all of the progressive ideas that we have. Without organizations, it is impossible for us to make the type of advances that we desire. And the enemies of our class enemies, the forces of oppression, they are aware of that when we unite, when we come together, it always creates uncomfortable moments for them. It is a question of, are we going to sustain it? And what are some of the things that we're going to do to sustain it? And our comrade mentioned, identify some things that we need to do. We all complain about capitalist exploitation. What are we going to do about it in the interim? How are we going to prepare the people ideologically and also operationally to build the economic forms that will be present in the free, in the liberated society of the future? I believe that labor self-management is something that we need to explore. We need to explore a radical program of worker co-op development. We need to create the enabling structures and organizations that would put workers even inside in the context of our capitalist society, in a position to engage in controlling, owning, managing, and operating their workplace. But it's not going to be a situation where they're trying to create a nation of shopkeepers among the workers, like what we've seen some of the existing worker co-ops, where people are worker cooperatives. They are doing something that is potentially radical, but they don't see themselves. I'm talking the worker cooperative movement. It doesn't see itself as a part of the class struggle, and definitely it doesn't unionize its members, member owners, to become part of the labor movement. If we're doing a radical worker ownership movement, we're going to be a part of organized labor, and we are going to see ourselves as part of this class struggle against capitalism. But what the practice of labor self-management would do, it would start to get us accustomed to making decisions in the workplace. It would also start to encourage or inspire the desire to also exercise political decisions over policies in society, and that will maybe encourage us to go into the assembly movement in our communities and be a part of that. So it's not just a point of production or workplace politics that we're fighting, but we also see ourselves as part of the community, and even the decisions that are made inside our labor self-managed firms can affect the community, and some of what we're doing would become also a part of the popular discourse in this alternative political space that we're developing. But we definitely need to look at labor self-management as a part of our political fight, as part of the process of developing the embryonic economic, political, and social institutions of the future socialist society. And I come now to organized labor. Those of us who are radical, we're very much disappointed with the direction of organized labor. And as someone who, as a part of QP for 7 years, as someone who was part of the leadership of the Toronto District Council or of QP locals in Toronto, someone who's very active in the labor movement and sat at senior leadership table, I realized that many of the people in the labor movement, and even people that we see as radicals, and we will go to labor federations and we're thinking, oh yeah, this is a very progressive person, these people are conservatives. They do not believe in a class struggle. They are not committed to the fight against white supremacy. They're not committed to the fight against patriarchy. But yet some of us, when they run on certain provincial federation, we see these people as the most radical labor fighter in Toronto. But when you're at the table with these people, you realize that they have much more further to go, that they're politically underdeveloped, they're socially backward on the question of the class struggle. But we can, for those of us who are in the labor movement, we can challenge these people. We can start to develop formations that are independent, autonomous of the structure in labor, that will fight for change. One area that those of us who are radicals can try to get access to is the member education programs, because many of the programs in our unions, our labor education programs, they're taught by us, fellow workers. That's an area that we need to get into. However, one thing you will find is that if you are known as a radical, you will not, even the staff, because while I was working on my PhD at OISE in adult education, I applied to become a member educator in QP, and I was turned down because of my political stance. They do not want certain type of people in there. So if we're going to try to capture some of those programs, the revolutionaries that are a part of us may not be known as people who associate with us. Because once you get in front of the members, you can deviate from the modules that you're given and you can raise certain critical questions. But that's an area that we need to organize around. But we also need to organize outside of the existing structures. They may have structures for racialized workers, they may have structures for injured workers or workers with disability. Once you're part of these structures, these constituency groups inside the labor movement become colonized. Because they may go to a convention, get elected, they won't see the members until two years later at the next convention. But we, organizing in those constituencies, can demand resources and can demand that these elected folks meet on a regular basis and that we determine the programs that are there. Because, and I know it's a very complicated thing that we're looking at in terms of how it is that the labor bureaucrats, both staff and elected leaders, are able to dominate. But we can organize to use the resources of organized labor to support the struggle for emancipation in society. And there are ways that we can do that. The last thing I want to point to is the role of intellectuals in our struggle. What role should they be playing? Because some academics will see themselves as radicals and they're teaching in a classroom and I think they're being transformative. They may be doing important work, but the problem is that we don't have access to their research, the research report or published articles. There's a lot of things you have to pay for these articles if you would like to get access to them. And many of these, people who see themselves as radicals, they do not write in popular spaces so that the ideas that they have can be made available to radicals in the movement. So it's like they're in a space where they think that they're radical because they're challenging other conservative professors, but really, it's different sets of glorified information technicians fighting amongst each other. Their work is irrelevant to what we're doing, even though it could be relevant if it's made accessible and in a form that we can use it. So we have to start to demand from the people who claim to be revolutionaries and intellectuals or part of our members of the organic intellectual group inside academy to become present, to be more present in our struggles. And there are 3 areas in which they can work. One, they can do applied research. So for example, if we're talking about the need to develop a labor self-management practice like in the city of Toronto, the research that they're doing around labor self-management could take on an applied quality so that it can be used, the research outcome can be used in our movement. The next area in which they can work is in the area of training and development. We talked about earlier having an activist training program and also critical mass public education. They can also play a role in ideological development, in social movement organizations, training people, developing people. So they can be relevant. And also the third area, and some of them are already doing that, is to become almost like the guardians for the working class and for oppressed people, that they will challenge dominant ideas in all available spaces, such conferences, in public media that they may have access to. They become like a champion of the oppressed with the ideas that they're presenting and presenting it in a way that is accessible to the people. So, and because, like some people may criticize academics or may criticize university-based intellectuals, but the reality is that in the modern period, if we look at the Mexican Revolution or the Haitian Revolution, those are 2 revolutions where the principal leaders weren't members of the petit bourgeoisie. But all revolutions from the French Revolution today, whether it's socialist revolution, it's led by the petit bourgeois, and there's a reason for that. So we have to be strategic in the way that we look at the petit bourgeois as a class of people, and to see how can we pull the most revolutionary elements in that class on the side of the people. A revolutionary by the name of Amilcar Cabral, he has this notion of class suicide. That and he was part of the national self-determination movement, or actually they engaged in warfare against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau. And he's saying that we need to bring the revolutionary petit bourgeois on the side of the workers, for them to give up their commitment to capitalism and embrace the struggle for emancipation. It's in a way that they commit class suicide and become workers, even though they will still have those characteristics in terms of the skills that they have, the access that they have. But in terms of their political commitment, in terms of the ideological commitment, it's clearly on the struggle for emancipation, and in a sense, they become one with the people. And one of the things that you'll find among many revolutionary intellectuals, within the African liberation movement, or the African revolution, whether we're looking at Walter Rodney, C.L.R. James, or we're looking at Fanon, is this preoccupation with the African petit bourgeois and the things that we need to do to bring a part of it over onto the side of the people. Even here, in this imperialist country's settler colonial society, Canada, we need to think strategically about the petit bourgeois element. But the activist training programs that we're developing and the critical mass education that we're doing, we will also, over time, develop the capacity within our movement where we have revolutionary intellectuals who are not in the university. But in the interim, we have to find a way to win over more radical petit bourgeois elements into our struggle. But over time, we're going to displace them. We won't even need them because we will have developed the capacity inside our movement for the type of work that revolutionary intellectuals do. Thank you.
Don't go away, comrade. On behalf of the Regional Social Forum Organizing Committee, I'd like to present you with the gift, some good news from Rabble.ca, invest of Rabble.ca. And you don't get to go away, I'd like to invite Camilla back up for a quick Q&A. We were supposed to have more time, but we don't. We're supposed to be done here in time for a very important event. That's actually not the time. So check your watches, don't look up there. Very important event that you don't want to miss, the music and celebration part of the social forum. Down the street at the East Village Coffee House, we have the test part of Test Theologic, so Testament, Darius. Paca, Nomad, and Dark Folk. All 3 acts for the very, very reasonable price of $8. Tickets going fast here at the door, so be sure to get your ticket before you leave this room. At one of the local meeting places down here, the East Village Coffee House. So you don't want to miss that. We do want to have some quick question and answer with both of our speakers this evening. I'm going to ask you to make your remarks, your questions brief, and if necessary, we'll focus on your questions. We don't have a second mic, so speak up, or you better still move up to be heard. And we'll take, I'll hope, maybe 2 or 3 questions in a row, and then have responses from both of our speakers this evening. So we've heard a lot of different ideas, some of them going in the same direction, some of them going in different directions, so I'm looking forward to a lively debate, even though it won't be terribly long.
Yeah, given that one of the important pieces of this social forum is thinking about and strategy heading into the People's Social Forum in Ottawa, and both of you have referred to the People's Social Forum. So I would just like to ask you what you think we can accomplish at the People's Social Forum. What kind of strategies would you suggest heading into that major event?
Thanks, Patty. More questions? Stand up and speak.
Question to
Sorry, I recognize the sister, and then you. 3 will be perfect. Yes, please do.
I demonstrated First Nations and the Warrior Society, and I just wanted to ask you, what do you think, what's your take, gentlemen, what's your take on Paca Mahon with the change?
With the chain?
With your
Oh,
Okay, and the question.
theory?
thank you.
And the question here.
asking for clarification when you said that activists were disappearing.
Speak up, please.
Disappearing activists, whether they left the movement or what that meant, seeking clarification on the reasons why people were leaving as you term disappearing.
Great, that's 3 questions. Disappearing activists, I don't know more, and People's Social Forum. You've spoken a whole bunch. Recently, you spoke before. Why don't we take it, Camilla, and then...
Can you hear me without the mic? My voice doesn't carry. Patty, the question that you raised is the million-dollar question. I don't have an excellent answer as much as I wish I had one. But to build on what I was trying to convey in my talk, my experiences, and I wonder to what extent you share some of these experiences, are that when we come together in spaces and avenues like this, we have wonderful discussions where a lot of different ideas get thrown out, but then we don't always know how to put them back together into something that's coherent and that shows us a clear way forward. Part of that, I think, is a function of the diversity of our movements, of the diversity of the different ideologies and perspectives on how to organize. I think that even within this room, there's probably a diversity of opinions concerning the utility of the state and of political parties for carrying forward political struggles. And I think that we're going to hear some of the same debates happen in the strategy sessions at the People's Social Forum. We haven't really figured out a way of bridging some of these differences and coming up with even the more bare bones political program. Looking back at the history of the World Social Forum, a number of attempts have been made toward that effect, to try to articulate even the basic political vision, agreeing on things like we are against capitalism, against colonialism, against oppression. Even bare-bone political statements such as this. I can give you an example, the Bamako Appeal. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the Bamako Appeal, but a number of intellectuals and other activists had articulated a political agenda, articulating some of the points that I just mentioned. But within the context of the World Social Forum, which was envisaged and has been organized since its inception as an open space, an arena for discussion, rather than a political actor, what ends up happening is that a lot of good ideas become articulated and that the strategic sessions have the best of intentions in moving forward with something more concrete that's going to last beyond the social forum, and more often than not, unfortunately, it ends up faltering. And I don't think we have yet come up with a way of moving forward. But I do think that if we arrive at the People's Social Forum in Ottawa with the intention that maybe we do want to have a campaign that we can all throw our weight and support behind, or that maybe we can articulate a vision for how to get rid of Harper, or something concrete. And I don't know how we're going to achieve this, because it depends on the kind of ways that we use to make decisions. If it was supposed to be 100% consensus decision making, we would probably never be able to arrive at any kind of agreement regarding a political program. These are all things that we still are working out as activists. And I really wish I had a good answer to that question. Maybe if we all pulled all of our insights together in this room, as I hope we will continue to do over the course of the weekend, that we will have a better answer. But I think that even coming into an event such as the People's Forum or this forum with that intention of carrying our efforts and our struggles past the World Social Forum, centered on some kind of a concrete goal, would be great. But it is not my place or my position necessarily to say that it should be this or that goal or that kind of campaign. I think that it is all up to us to decide what it would be. But I think from a strategic point of view, it would be good to have, like Comrade was saying, some kind of goal so that we can have that military, although I'm a pacifist, but the military precision to get us there. And regarding the clarification, what I was saying about activists disappearing, I didn't mean to say that they're disappearing in the sense that they will never embark upon another social struggle. My experience is limited to my observations and sometime participation in Occupy Toronto, and I know that some of the struggles I had to do and that were responsible for the dissipation of the Occupy Toronto site after it was evicted from the site had to do with some of the struggles around the decision making, and I hate to say this, but the ways in which Occupy brought together different people who did not necessarily see eye to eye, and part of it has to do with that activist training. Some of the people were brand new. I know that in Toronto it was not the usual suspects who comprised the bulk of the people who were doing the actual occupation. The people who didn't end up attaching themselves to something more sustainable were the ones who tended to disappear into the woodwork. So that is where a lot of the energy from Occupy Toronto went, and I know that there were a lot of people who were quite central to Occupy, but didn't end up using their energies to sustain other struggles, that simply gave in to some of the frustrations of trying to make decisions by 100% consensus all the time, which is a really tricky, although certainly a noble intention. But some of the frustrations of trying to hold general assemblies every single day in the winter outside after they were all evicted without the institutional infrastructural support of trying to work for something that has that institutional backing meant that a lot of them crumbled out, unfortunately. And although I do hope that they continue and engage in struggles beyond it, I do believe that that sustainable infrastructure is really necessary to maintain the momentum and maintain people's commitment. I'm not sure if that clarifies your question. I didn't mean to say that everyone disappeared, certainly, and as I mentioned, certain activists continue. Excuse me. Yeah.
Sorry, we have constraints on the space. John?
Yeah, the idea of disappearing activists is very real. Many of the comrades that I worked with in Toronto in the 1980s, radical folks, I don't even know where they are, but I know they're not doing organized political work. But people have moved on. People with skills. It's like, when I call for the abolition of the family, and I don't have the time to get into that, it has a lot to do with the fact that when we're preoccupied with raising children and taking care of mortgage, it makes us more conservative. It divorces us from radical possibilities or radical visioning and organizing. But we're losing a lot of people with experience, but they've just gone off to conventional lives. It's an experience. That's something that we need to look at in terms of what is accounting for that. No, family life is a part of it, but it's more than family life. There are times when people are burned out from activism, or they get frustrated with struggle, and that may have to do with insufficient ideological development, that people expect there's going to be a revolution around the corner, which we have been anticipating since the 19th century. But, so there are a lot of things that are kind of, it's a very real problem that we have skilled people who have left the struggle, and then we have to kind of develop newer folks to do the work. At the People's Social Forum in Ottawa, there will be movement assemblies, and that is where they were organized. For example, a number of us in Toronto sent in sent in an application for People's Assembly looking at Africa, Africans, and international solidarity. And what we're hoping for is using that space as a coordinating space where we can develop campaigns, we can identify issues that we're going to organize around, and then go back into our communities, start to do some of those work. But then out of that assembly, we will develop a network that will try to sustain the work. And some of the things that I talked about, some of the things I identified as things that we need to do, we can start to develop our people across the country and have a more coordinated struggle. So in terms of a strategy or expectation, I'm looking at the movement assemblies as the space where we're going to talk about how do we practically move the struggle forward. The revolutionary Amilcar Cabral, and if you're not aware of him, go at Marxist.org, you'll see some of his writings. Amilcar Cabral from Guinea-Bissau. He was one of his most favorite, or most famous quotes is this, that people are not motivated by ideas in anyone's head. They want to see their lives move forward, they want to live in peace, they want to see a better life for their children. But that doesn't mean that they're not concerned with ideas and ideology, but we've got to bring both together. As we attend to people's needs, the way we organize is also organized in an ideological way. So even though you may, in some cases, you're not explicitly expressing certain ideas, the values informing what we're organizing around will also be an ideological education. On the question of I don't know more, and in the indigenous self-determination movement, we must give solid support to it. And unfortunately, in our discussion, I didn't mention that other than like colonial policing, but it's something that we need to center into our movement. For those of us who are part of the non-indigenous communities, if we're truly in solidarity, we will support self-determination for the indigenous people. And when we talk about self-determination, we're talking about territorial self-determination over unceded land. And that is going to come in conflict with many of the interests that many of us believe that we hold. Because the territories that we're living in that are not ceded, we will have to give that up or come to some understanding about how you're going to share that territory. So a lot of people, when we talk about indigenous self-determination, some people think it means to stay in these small little reserves and have more autonomy over the aspects of their life. It's also about the land. It's also about getting back on the territory. And I know in English Canada, a lot of people talk about Quebec as the right to self-determination. But I'm saying that the settlers in Quebec will have to deal with the land question among the indigenous people before they can think about going off and setting up their own house. But for some reason, a lot of Anglophone activists are so infatuated with what's going on in Quebec that we don't look at the land question as, in their quest for self-determination.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it is 9, and the event is about to start down the street at East Village Coffee House. So for your further questions, and I'm sure you have more, we've heard lots from both speakers. You'll both be around for the weekend. We have a panel tomorrow with the gentleman, and Camilla will be with us. So as your questions come up, you can have other conversations and other dialogues with both of these speakers. So I'd like to, on behalf of the organizing committee, just thank them once more, invite you to join us and thank them one more. And don't forget to get your tickets and get down the street. It is an $8 suggested donation, but it is a non-exclusive sliding scale with nobody turned away for lack of funds. All of the funds go to support the artists who are performing. So it's both a good cause and a good time. Please join us, and please thank the speakers. And come back tomorrow and Saturday. Saturday and Sunday.
Everything will be locked up. What? We can just leave everything set up, can't we? hope so.